Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best united progressive contributors to our movement. This week we're in for a treat. We just had the Democratic debates take place in Los Angeles. This is the sixth Democratic debate. And so we figured to wrap up the year, we haven't been doing this for every debate, we'll have another reaction so that we can gauge where the candidates really are going right as we prepare to get into the Iowa caucuses and beyond. With me today, we have on David, Kennedy, and John to be able to react to today's debate. Before we guys get into this, I want to give each of you an introduction to call out what you do for a living as well as where you're from to the Rosebuds out there. Kennedy, want to let the Rosebuds know a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm Kennedy, Kennedy Cooper. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I work in small business development, and I also have a podcast called Not Safe for Wonks.
Very cool. I have actually a lot of family out in Albuquerque, so small
Oh,
coincidences out
yeah.
there. Yeah, so I've definitely visited Albuquerque. It's a great area. So our next guest that we have on is John. John, want to let the Rosebuds know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm John Michael. I'm from Rhode Island, and I'm a student in Boston. I volunteer for the Bernie Sanders campaign, and a few months ago, I started a YouTube channel, The Outsider Report. I study engineering. I'm a freshman in college. I'm 18, and that's about it.
Well, we're very happy to have you on. It's going to be a great time having these contrasting opinions from a variety of supporters that we got today. And our last guest that we have on today is David. David, want to let the folks out there know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is David Walker. I am a software engineer. I'm a former teacher as well in computer science. I also do a lot of poll stuff on Twitter. I keep track of polls. I do some data creation with it using mathematics, and I guess it's sort of popular. I guess I don't know, but yeah, I'm excited to talk about this debate today.
Well, we're excited to have you on, and I think everyone here can agree that data is power in our current environment. So I appreciate having that perspective being added to this conversation. So I think the first and foremost question that is the most important that we got to handle is first, before we judge a debate, I think it's very appropriate that we all kind of lay out some level of biases of where we were, who we're really supporting. So I want to know from each of you, who were you supporting before the debate, and has anything changed now, and who are you supporting currently? Kennedy, where were you at before and after?
So before watching the debate, I was definitely already, I've been pretty much just focusing on Bernie the last couple of months. I try to keep a pretty open mind towards all the candidates in general, all throughout the cycle, but it's just, it's getting closer, and I'm just been seeing him, really stand up for the things that matter most to me. So he did that in this debate very well, and so I still like him a lot coming out. I would say besides him that I've always had a certain amount of interest and respect for Yang, and that he really shone this time, I thought. And that Warren also impressed me a couple of times, but I still have a lot of issues with her, and we'll get into that.
Well, it's great to have an open mind out there, and I think everyone can respect Bernie Sanders as a champion of what he does. Some may disagree with him, but we all know who he is and can trust where he stands. John, I know you are a Bernie supporter now. How are you feeling before the debate? You were a Bernie supporter beforehand, correct?
So, well, actually, beforehand, I was a Hickenlooper supporter, and I now support Bernie Sanders. Um, and like I said, I'm a volunteer for the Bernie campaign. I've been a supporter of his since he joined in the race and since 2016, really. In the past few months, I've gotten involved in the campaign. And I think I like the trajectory that his poll numbers are showing right now. But I also have a lot of respect for Tulsi and Yang, so interested to hear what everyone else has to say.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of coalescing between some of these anti-establishment candidates where there's at least a mutual respect, even if we don't agree on their full solutions. And I think a lot of Bernie supporters are those lifelong fans, so it's no surprise that you were one of those as well. How about you, David? Going in, where were you and where are you coming out?
Well, I think it was no surprise to a lot of my followers that I was a Yang supporter. Over time, though, I've decided I'd remain completely neutral. I wouldn't support a candidate publicly, so I refused to support a candidate publicly. And coming out of the debate, I also refused to support a candidate publicly. Surprise, surprise. If I had to choose a top four, though, I would say Yang, Bernie, Tulsi, and Elizabeth Warren. I would say are my top four right now. I kind of go back and forth with Tulsi a little bit, but outside of that, I think the other ones are pretty solid.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are starting to feel that vibe, especially with the whole impeachment thing. It's really kind of shaking the boat a little bit of where we want to stand on that regard. But it's great to have you on, and I think we're all going to have that same perspective of we at least know that we're going to need some big structural change one way or another. So before we kind of get into really the whole debate itself, I want to know how you guys felt about the actual performances of the candidates that you currently support. Kennedy, how were you feeling about Bernie Sanders? How do you think he did in the debate yesterday?
I think he was pretty admirable. I actually have been pretty critical of his debate performances so far. And just for the record, I was not Bernie 2016 person. So I was a hard sell on Bernie. And I like people to know that because, you know, even in these debates, like I really didn't vibe with a lot of his earlier debate performances. I thought this debate was exactly what I wanted to see on so many levels. I think that he was, you know, able to command the stage a lot more so than in the past. I think he was funny. I think he was insightful. And I think that, you know, he did a good job of both linking a lot of things back to his core platform issues and also addressing the things at hand, not just brushing past every question.
Okay. John, were you equally satisfied with Bernie's performance?
Yeah, I think this was maybe his best performance, and if it wasn't his best, it was definitely in the top two. I think definitely he was given more speaking time because of few amount of candidates. It really allowed him to get his points across more clearly, elaborate more, and land more punches on other candidates because there was more time for inter-candidate debates. And I do think Bernie helped himself in this debate, particularly. He may have taken some of Biden's supporters, which is what he needs right now in terms of the polling. But overall, I think this was one of his better debates.
Okay. How about you, David? I know there's no specific candidate that you currently are supporting, but how did you feel about the grouping that you said? Did you think they did a good job at the debate?
Okay, my group's canceled. So Tulsi was not in it, so she's out. I think he did pretty well tonight. I'll talk a little bit more last night. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Bernie did all right, and I think Warren did okay as well. Overall, I don't think there was any one candidate that really did terrible except for one particular candidate that I will hold off on until later on. So outside of that, I think they all did pretty well to me.
Okay. Well, I think that's really the first place we kind of got to get to in terms of a transition. I think before we really kind of talk about all the moments in the debate, we really should just go into where we thought the candidates actually did in terms of winners, losers, and those that just didn't really move the needle at all. Where did you think, David, in terms of the winners and losers, as you were kind of starting to allude to?
Okay, so I'm a man of numbers. So I had to go with the hard numbers before making a decision on what I thought was the best candidate and who won for the night. So the clear winner, getting a plus 4% amongst consideration of voters and a plus 6% in net favorability change. Number one, first place, gold medal, Amy Klobuchar. No doubt, wow. She went right after Pete Buttigieg, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Did you also want me to talk about losers and no changers too, or just winners?
Yeah, right? Who do you have as your losers?
Okay, the big loser. Okay, so the big loser, I went back and forth on this, and I know what the mainstream media is saying. The mainstream media is saying it's Steyer. I don't agree with them. I think actually Steyer did a pretty good job, and the 538 hard numbers were showing that Steyer actually did pretty well. He actually got second best in consideration. I think second best in consideration, I'm not sure, and third best or fourth best in favorability. So he's not the loser. The big loser is Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg, he was hammered by Warren by Klobuchar, hammered by Sanders, and then even Yang threw a little pebble at him. All over, and especially this wine cave argument that I believe Warren started, and then everyone else kind of piled on. That was, I will say this much, as somebody who has openly expressed his dislike for Pete Buttigieg, I gotta say, that was actually kind of satisfying to watch.
Yeah.
It actually really was. I will say, second place winner, silver medal, I have to give to Andrew Yang based on the numbers. Do I think it's enough for him to get a boost in the polls? Oh, I'm not quite sure, but I think that he was very different. He distinguished himself out there, and that's why he got a higher net favorability rating. I also think that even though it doesn't really translate to vote consideration tallies, I think he was still like third lowest in vote consideration tallies. But overall, I think that he had probably the second best night. I know a lot of people would say it's Biden. I think Biden did okay, but I really wish the mainstream media quit trying to grade him on a curve compared to his other debates, because I feel like that they're grading him on a curve, and that's why they're giving him second place. Really, second place to me is Yang. So Klobuchar, Yang was top two, and there isn't a second loser for me. There's one clear loser, one big loser, Pete Buttigieg. Outside of maybe that terrible background that they had.
Yeah, I think we could all agree potentially that the moderators might have been the actual losers. But yeah, I think a lot of us in anti-establishment kind of circles would really say it was a satisfying night to see Pete become Wine Cave Pete. How about you, John? Do you have similar winners and losers? How'd you view that debate?
Mostly, yes. So my two big winners were Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang. And I mean, that's not. I know I'm a supporter of Bernie, but I do think he had a good night, even objectively. I mean, there were focus groups that had Bernie and Yang as the two big winners. Again, I think he and Yang did a really good job of getting across their policies. Unfortunately, Yang was screwed with the speaking time again. I know that's pissed a lot of people off the past 6 debates, because he's always the bottom of speaking time. He had about half the time as Bernie, but he came off really charismatic. He had a great point about economic value isn't human value. He marketed his UBI well as usual, and Bernie for the reasons I mentioned before. My other winner, I would say, I think Elizabeth Warren was a winner, but not as much as Bernie and Yang. I think Warren, I was so happy when she brought up the wine cave thing, because I was just waiting for someone to bring that up, and I would have been severely disappointed if they didn't. So she did a really good job on campaign finance and corruption, and of course she always plugs her wealth tax. And that's a popular policy, so I have to give her credit for it. So I think those were the three winners. I think Amy Klobuchar, I think she was overrated in her performance, and I think part of that was because she had the second highest speaking time, and she was the second lowest polling candidate. There was no reason why she should have been 30 seconds above Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren in speaking time. It just doesn't add up. So she got way too much time, and the media is just trying to make her happen so much that they're just trying to drill that narrative into people's heads that Amy Klobuchar won, which I think contributed to her polling numbers. But I don't think substantively she really added anything to the conversation. She did hit Mayor Pete on not having the experience or anything, so I thought that was a good attack. But substantively, she just I'm from the Midwest, I can unify the country, I can beat Trump. There was nothing on policy. Joe Biden, him and Tom Steyer, I just feel like didn't really move the needle for either of them that much. Because Joe Biden, his supporters, a lot of them don't watch the debate, or if they do, they don't really care who wins. I don't think this really affected Joe Biden's poll numbers that much, maybe a few points. Tom Steyer, same thing. I don't know if he's going to make the next debate. And the loser, of course, was Mayor Pete. He was getting hammered from all sides. He took hits from Bernie, from Warren, and Amy Klobuchar, and then, like you mentioned, Yang a little bit. And he just did not have good responses for his corruption, because corruption is indefensible. You can't defend, doing a fundraiser in a wine cave. So overall, yeah, Bernie, Yang, and Warren are my winners. in my no change, like middle tier, it was Amy Klobuchar, Joe Biden, Tom Steyer, and Mayor Pete was definitely the big loser.
Okay, so we have consistently so far, Yang has been a winner, and we've said consistently so far that Pete Buttigieg is the loser. Kennedy, does that level with you as well?
I would say that my assessment is somewhat similar, for sure. I think that Yang and Bernie both came out very strong, kind of for different reasons. I think Bernie really proved some things about like being able to consistently convey his platform in ways that are engaging and things like that. Whereas I think Yang kind of had a little bit of a different victory. Um, he sort of was able to stand out on some interesting issues. Obviously, the being the only person of color question was like a very special moment for him. Um, and it was a question that he answered really well. And like sometimes I get a little annoyed with Yang when he ties everything back to UBI, but this time I was like, this is the way. This is the perfect way to do it right here, like this is just like a very, very good and compelling argument that ties together so many topical issues. So I thought that Yang had a few incredible moments like that, and I think that those moments gave him a new kind of credibility in the eyes of certain people. I think for a lot of people like myself, where Bernie's my first choice, I'm kind of trying to decide which of these other structural people I can trust the most. Um, and Yang gave me more reasons to trust him. So there you go. So I think they both came out really strong. I don't know if I could pick one of them and say Yang did better, Bernie did better. They both did really amazing. And then my runner-up would have to be Amy Klobuchar. I can't stand the woman, to be clear, as a politician, or I don't think we would get along as people either. But it's hard to deny that she kind of recognized that this was her moment, that a lot of other low polling candidates have washed out, and she's managed to stay in, and this is like she's in the big leagues now and she needs to do something with it. And some of the answers were definitely not substantive enough, but she took a lot of shots, and sometimes that's enough to move the needle, and I think it was. And as far as losers, I really have to agree that Pete just stunk. For someone who often manages to come across well-spoken, articulate, and sort of able to thoughtfully address a lot of things, he really just seemed like he was stumbling, like he was lost, like he didn't know what he wanted to say. I think that he's lost the total clarity of his campaign, and it shows.
Yeah, no, I certainly can agree with you on that point, and I think everyone here has said it. He got pummeled, and I think that's actually one of the biggest reasons why Amy Klobuchar was a winner. And I think it's the fact that they had such similar bases, and so Pete getting destroyed and her showing that kind of electability factor, because I think a lot of people are looking for this kind of aggressive nature, someone who can actually stand up to Trump on a debate stage. I think she kind of showed that vibe, while Pete was kind of almost infantilicized, from Bernie basically saying, you're a young kid, I know you got energy, to Warren saying you got the wine cave on you. I think he kind of lost that veneer of I'm the professional, I'm the serious person, and Klobuchar kind of stepped into that lane, and I think that really helped her. I also have to agree that I think Bernie as well as Yang did really solid. I think Bernie was a lot more volatile. There were moments that, although I will fully give him credit, the answer afterwards on the subject of race was perfectly fine. The optics of the actual cutoff that the moderators did, at least with the people I was watching with, came off really poorly for Bernie. I know there are reaction groups that would differ on this, but I found that that was a very weak moment for him. But I thought he had a lot of really strong answers, and he showed this time that he was willing to fight. I think too often he's kind of been the friendly guy treating Joe Biden with only the Iraq war thing as his only criticism. Now he kind of took off the gloves and made the billionaire comments as well. So I really agree, kind of those three people were the best. I'll also give Warren some credit. I think she had possibly the best moment of the night, even though she kind of faded, when they simply asked, well, I'm going to be the youngest woman out there too. I think that really was the loudest reaction the crowd had, and it was a very clever and charming way for her to do it, even if there was a lot of moments she got kind of dirty in that exchange with Pete Buttigieg. So I think, yeah, I kind of agree with where you all are at in terms of who is being grouped in as winners and a very, very clear loser. Wine Cave Pete is going to stick, and I honestly believe he is done.
And I'm loving it.
I love it too, and that's why the media is also propping up Klobuchar, because they know he just got buried.
Well, that's kind of a pattern if you think about it in this primary. It's been the mainstream media props up someone and it gets knocked down. Prop up someone, knocks them down. I actually had picked back in November, and you've seen this, Jonathan. You've seen this. Back in November, I chose Amy Klobuchar would win Iowa, but she's not going to win the primary. And nobody believed me back then because she was at like 2% or something in Iowa. Well, here we are now where she's about ready to break out and probably even break into the top tier in Iowa. So just saying.
Hey, it's definitely a possibility. So I got to ask, I think a lot of people have been not too surprised to see some of these people who have been shining shine again. Were there any moments that you found particularly surprising about this debate? John, was there anything that you saw that was shocked you that happened that night?
Honestly, I don't think there was. I think Bernie coming off as aggressive as he did was surprising to me because this is, this is what we're waiting for. If you're a Bernie supporter, like you're waiting for him to actually come out swinging against other candidates. Like we always hear him talk about Trump. We always hear him, talk about his policies. But it's about time he finally attacked other candidates, like Joe Biden and Pete for the billionaire donors, which I thought was the line of the night. And I think I was surprised at the amount of candidates that came after Mayor Pete. I wrote down my predictions before the debate, and I did say that Mayor Pete would take some hits. I was surprised at how many candidates came after Mayor Pete. He was really the punching bag of the night. Last time it was Elizabeth Warren. So I think just Bernie's aggressiveness and Mayor Pete's just overall, slew of attacks from other candidates were the two main surprises for me.
Okay. How about you, Kennedy? What did you find surprising from last night's debate?
So I actually think one of my biggest surprises was the moderator interrupting Bernie. I agree with you that it definitely worked in terms of it was meant to give him bad optics, and it did. However, you could point to so many instances over the course of the night of other candidates doing the same thing, waffling around questions they don't really want to answer. And even compared to other debates, these moderators were not holding the candidates to a very high standard, I felt, a lot of the night, just in general. As much as I like this debate overall, and I think aspects of the structure were better, it really felt like there was just kind of this attitude of here's your question. Okay, we're moving on. And it doesn't really matter what they said for a lot of the questions. And so for that moderator to just, excuse me, Bernie, but this is it's first of all, these are presidential candidates you're speaking to, I don't want to pull the civility card too often because I don't really believe in it that much. But on a stage like this, I feel like there's a way that you would talk to these people, and it wasn't that. So the whole thing was just kind of shocking. Again, I was not a longtime Bernie supporter, so I only kind of recently got fully on the bandwagon of learning about how the media treats him differently, and they really do. And this was just that was really shocking because it just felt like such a blatant. They planned this. They planned this to make him look bad, and it's just bizarre that this is this theatrical.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with you. I think sometimes you got to have the fair referee. I think the biggest point in terms of the inconsistency, Joe Biden just straight up dodged that reparations question. And there was no, hey, want to stay on topic here? It definitely was selective. I still will say the optics are bad, but yeah, of course the media here showed its bias. It was very obvious. And the more you kind of follow these types of candidates in that anti-establishment circle, the more you kind of become aware of that whole media bias. David, how about you? What did you really think was the biggest surprise of the debate?
Yeah, so I am no big fan of media bias. I mean, I've always railed on it on Twitter over and over about how terrible the mainstream media has been. But I will say that of the 6 debates so far, this has probably been the best one. And that's actually been very surprising to me. Now, that's been a very low bar, but it's an extremely low bar. I mean, all they had to do was just make it somewhat competent, and they succeeded in doing that. And I think the time that they were given, Yang did get the least time. That's no surprise. The surprise was that it was a little bit more than half of what Bernie Sanders, who got the most time, did. So that was also a nice little surprise. But if I wanted to get an individual surprise that probably no one had noticed, remember the topic of immigration? And a lot of people, and there was some people talking about like the Dream DACA and like compensation to children, and they're trying to mix it in with descendants as well, descendant reparations. I'm sorry. Well, Tom Steyer actually made this comment, and it really did shock me. This was kind of, I think I saw this the second time around, and it's like a light bulb just went in my head, and I just had to give him props for this one. That when they were talking about immigration, he mentioned that no, Trump is actually not against immigration. He's only against immigration by non-white people, and that he's the only person on that stage that actually pointed that out. I had to give him huge props on that. That one surprised me the most. It's because for me, for example, I have a little bit of moderate conservative still in me as well. I do believe in, like, for illegal immigration, you have to follow the rules and all that. But the problem is, and this has been my biggest issue with illegal immigration, is that no one's really following the rules anyway. Like, Trump himself had talked with his cabinet and said, dang, why can't we get more of those people from Norway? And then we wouldn't have these problems. And are you kidding me? So obviously this illegal immigration, that was where I switched from being like anti-illegal immigration to pro-illegal immigration, is because I realized this is not an issue of following the rules anymore. This is an issue of racism. And I'm really glad that Steyer actually pointed that out, because I felt like that needed to be brought out to the stage and make people realize, especially those Republicans on TV that might be watching, or independents on TV, that this is not an issue of just following the rules. It's something that I've had to explain to my own family who is conservative. This is not following the rules. This is about, well, we don't want non-white immigrants here. We only want white immigrants here. We're perfectly fine with, Melania Trump sneaking in and, coming in and working illegally, but, Mexican family, go away.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to give props to Steyer for that one. Yeah. And that actually brought him up a notch in my book.
Yeah, I gotta say, now you calling that out, it does surprise me that he, of all the people on the stage, was the one to call that out. But I have to say, I think the biggest surprise for me was that finally Bernie Sanders got the most amount of speaking time. In every debate, they've been really trying to hammer home, Bernie, you're not getting to speak. Yang, you're not getting to speak. And Bernie somehow emerged with the most amount of speaking time. I wasn't actually surprised at all that this was the best debate, and I don't think the moderators deserve an ounce of credit for that. They made so many errors. I think it was simply due to the fact that we had a field of 7 finally. It was really tiresome to have these fields of 10. You get these very small sound bites, and then they're basically gone for the rest of the night. This gave a little bit more interchange. We got a little bit more drama through it, and I think simply the smaller field really accomplished that. So I am not surprised, and I would not be surprised going forward if we get a little bit of a higher quality of a debate, because now we only have more competent people on stage. Because no one wants to see Hickenlooper on stage. No one wants to see Tim Ryan on stage. I'm sorry. Even I'll say, not to throw shots, not a lot of people wanted Gillibrand on stage. So I think, frankly, we're now kind of at this final stage, and now the levels have been risen. So I think that is to be expected.
Well, it's like what I said. Well, it's like what I told you. Politics is basically a sport for people too old to play sports. And this is the closest that we've ever gotten to an actual political sports league, and this is officially the playoffs.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
That's a great way of putting it.
So I got to ask, now that we've kind of seen the surprises, the things that we didn't see coming, what do you guys think were the actual, takeaways from this? I think a lot of the times we'll say, yeah, there is some moments, but then it fades away. Memory gets so distracted. What lines do you think are really going to actually stick and have an impact from tonight's or yesterday's debate? How do you feel, John?
So I know we've mentioned it 10 times already, but I think the wine cake Pete is just never going away. I actually think that's just going to be like a thorn in the side of his campaign for the rest of the time. So that was definitely one of the best lines of the night. Another line that stuck out was when Bernie said, Joe, you got 44 billionaire donors, and Pete, you got 39 billionaire donors. Maybe you can catch up to Joe. I think that is actually going to stick in people's minds because I think that actually affects people's decisions even more so than some of the issues. Because a lot of Joe Biden voters actually are like, yeah, I like Joe Biden moderation. I don't want big change. Most of them are older, so if you say, okay, even if you agree on him on the issues, he's corrupt, he's taking money from billionaires, I think that sticks in more in some ways than the issues debate. Another point I thought that stuck out was Amy Klobuchar had a really effective attack on Mayor Pete, where she basically pointed out everyone else's accomplishments on stage. She said like Warren, CFPB, and Biden, Bernie, the VA bill. And then she says, Mayor Pete, you haven't accomplished anything. You're not qualified to be up here. And again, I think that's another thing that might stick with Pete and that might make a lasting impact. And it's also one of the reasons I think Mayor Pete lost the debate, just because, again, he was taking so many attacks. And I'm glad David brought up the point about the Tom Steyer non-white immigration, because I had forgotten about that line. But when I heard that was a really good line, I think he actually nailed it right in the head, because we do, Donald Trump does, like immigrants from white countries, just not non-white countries. And that was a good point to make in that scenario. Yang had a good point on one of them, the special needs question. Obviously, he talked a lot about it. It's personal to him and his family. So I think he did a really good job of explaining, how, they should earn a UBI too. He did a good job of marketing the UBI in that question and how it relates back to people with special needs. And then again, I mentioned this before, but his line about, your economic value isn't tied to human value, and then tying that back into UBI, I thought that was good too. And I did think he did a better job of marketing his UBI this debate than in previous debates, which is another reason I think he was one of the winners. And people might disagree with me on this one, but Bernie's answer on climate change and race, I think, was a great answer. And, he was interrupted by the moderator because he didn't directly come out and say race, but he was making the point that climate change is directly linked to race, because the areas that are going to be affected most are areas with high minority populations. So he did a good job of explaining like the intersectionality of climate change and race, and you could just see the clear bias of the moderator to try and like play gotcha, as well as the bias of the audience, which I'll get to in another question. But those points, I think overall, I think those would stick out to me as some of the most important ones.
Okay. How did you feel, Kennedy? Did you have similar moments, or were there something different that you think is going to really stick going forward?
I think the sound bites that stuck out to me were Warren saying I'd be the youngest woman ever elected president. Like that was one of her best sound bites she's ever done for sure. I think Yang, again, I already mentioned it, but the like tying UBI to being the only person of color on stage, like that is a great UBI soundbite that I really hope he uses, because I think this is the kind of stuff that would get more people excited about him, is presenting it this way. All too often it's presented in a way that's slightly esoteric to a lot of common people, but this was very direct. And I think the other soundbite that actually stands out, this is a negative one, was Joe Biden talking about Guantanamo Bay. That was a bit of a surprise question for me. I wasn't expecting Guantanamo Bay, of all things, to come up. I kind of assumed that everyone had just given up on ever even thinking about that again, or much less like doing anything about it. So for the moderators to bring it up and ask, why didn't this happen? And then for Joe to kind of waffle around, and then like all of that to also be tied into talk of Afghanistan, it just kind of led to some messy sound bites for Joe that, even though I don't see him as a big loser, I think if people like work these sound bites, it's going to be somewhat damning.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with you on that. And I actually think, reflecting on that, that's one of my surprises as well, that they even pushed on that topic. So I think that and his kind of throwing Obama under the bus finally on some of this was kind of a key moment of that debate. How about you, David?
Yeah, Joe Biden throwing Obama under the bus. That's a huge surprise.
I mean, we all know that was what Julian Castro called him out on one debate for that, or was it?
Yeah.
It was Cory Booker or Julian Castro
They
called him out
both
on
did
that.
actually in different debates.
Yeah, so he's very selective with Obama. At some point, you got to just say, like, come on, Joe, like, put it
You're
together.
your own guy.
Yeah, you're your own
Actually,
guy.
regarding that Guantanamo Bay topic, he actually he dodged that question entirely. And as far as I remember, he actually talked about the Israeli two-state solution he wanted for Israel and Palestine. So, yeah, he just basically dodged that question entirely. I checked it on my summary when I did the second watch around today.
I thought he had basically said with that it was like almost like a recruiting tool for terrorists, that the threat of Guantanamo Bay was something that basically said, yeah, we're keeping all your brothers and sisters locked away under no civil rights, essentially. No wonder you hate us. But otherwise, David, was there other moments of the debate that you thought were particularly noteworthy and are going to carry beyond this December?
All right, how about hashtag Wine Cave? We'll start with that one. That one's pretty
that's easy.
obvious, and you two have already made plenty of comment on that one, so I'm not going to go any further on that. I do want to talk about, I think Andrew Yang probably provided the most sound bites of the night, I feel like. Maybe they're not as hard-hitting as your Warrens or Klobuchars, but he did hit quite a bit. Like, for example, one regarding strong men treat women well. If you get too many men alone and leave us alone for a while, we kind of become morons. And I actually laughed out loud when I heard that one because
That was a funny
of a personal issue that I've actually had on Twitter. I can kind of understand. Okay, so I'll moving on though. The one that actually got me the most was when he was like the first candidate I felt like that actually talked about people with autism. And it's kind of all tying together, the whole like Asians, autism, these new ideas that he's brought in, these unique ideas that he has. It's almost like Andrew Yang is becoming, almost like Andrew Yang is becoming sort of a champion for this invisible person. You know, the person that you don't hear very much in the mainstream. I'm not talking about like what you hear on the mainstream media, what is invisible. I'm talking about the really invisible, the ones that they won't tell you about, you know, or they might throw a bone to on an article once in a blue moon. You know, the autistic people, some of the transgendered, some of the, you know, the Asians as well, probably what they call the invisible race many times. Being half Asian myself, I feel like he's becoming champion of that invisible candidate, and he's finally kind of shining. And it's only took until this debate where he became the only candidate of color that I think people are starting to realize that this guy is very unique from the rest of the field. And I'm hoping that will translate so that he would show up on the January debate field, but I will talk about that a little bit more later on. But yeah, that one, I feel like Yang really struck to me as that candidate champion of the voiceless. As I've said in a pro wrestling terms, there's a wrestler who was very popular back in 2011, I believe. His name is CM Punk, and they called him the voice of the voiceless. Well, that's what I think Andrew Yang is like here. He's kind of the voice of the voiceless when it comes to politics, I feel like, because he's talking about things no one else is talking about, and he's representing people whom up until this point have never really had a champion. So that's pretty much how I feel like regarding Yang, and I feel like that he's got the most memorable moments of the night overall.
Yeah, I can certainly echo that sentiment. I think all the moments you guys brought up were really great ones, so I'm not going to go through them all that much other than to say Wine Cave Pete is going to be the name that sticks, so that's going to be the biggest one. But a couple others that I just wanted to bring up is I think first was from the very start of the debate, they started with impeachment, and Yang was the only one who basically called out the media as the reason why we're so divided and can't settle on this. And I thought that was particularly memorable because he was just the only dissenting view on the stage at that moment. And the other one I thought was pretty noteworthy. I don't know if it'll stick or not, but the Joe Biden stutter moment. I think was noteworthy when he was describing the person who couldn't talk and he was I, and then went into his actual explanation. I think that was something that was at least noteworthy from the debate, and I think unfairly he's been picked on. I think it was Sarah Sanders did that and she got blasted and then deleted it, but I think there's this notion of some concerns of electability when he kind of does those types of moments on stage, where you may, interpret it and have understanding, but to the wider audience, they may not be as sympathetic. So I thought that was something worth noting as well. With that being said, regardless of the sound bites, I want to go a little bit more into the substance of what was kind of talked about on the debate stage. What were some of the questions that you guys were really happy finally got a chance to be talked about? How'd you feel on that one, John?
For the questions, in terms of, I'm happy that they got talked about. I'm glad someone brought up the Afghanistan papers. I'm glad that was asked, and I really think it would have been journalistic malpractice if they didn't ask about that, because that's just a giant, bombshell revelation. But it didn't get as much time as it deserved. I mean, this is like a huge story, and it got maybe 5 minutes on the debate stage. So I'm happy it was asked. I'm not happy that it was that it got as little time as it did. Another question that I was surprised was asked in a good way was, I think it was Tim Alberta asked, should the government subsidize people moving to higher ground for climate change? And that's an issue that no one's really addressed, because we already know that people are going to have to move for climate change. We don't know the extent of it at this point. But I'm really glad that it was asked. It wasn't really a good answer. I think it was Amy Klobuchar. It wasn't really a good answer, but I'm glad it was finally brought to people's attention that this is something that we're going to have to deal with, and we're going to actually have to start putting policies for what to deal with it. Special needs, I'm glad that one was addressed as well. As I mentioned, Andrew Yang did a good job with that, and Elizabeth Warren also had a good job with that. And I think those were some topics I'm glad were brought up. And yeah, that's about it.
Okay,
Excuse me 1 second.
Yeah, I can certainly agree with you that those are topics that are not nearly discussed enough, so I was very happy to see them discussed. I will push back a little bit on that. Yang literally said in a previous debate that we have to move to higher ground and named his plan that. So I
I'm
think
talking about the questions.
Oh,
I'm
just
glad
it
they
hasn't been
actually
talked about
directly.
before.
Yeah. No, I know
Okay,
Yang
so
brought that
yeah,
up.
so I apologize for misunderstanding
No,
that,
no
but
problem.
I agree it is important that it is talked about, because I think previously people laughed at him for even saying that. So I'm glad it was actually talked about as a serious topic. How about you, Kennedy? What questions do you think were particularly great being brought up?
I definitely want to agree that the adults with disabilities question is it's the kind of thing that I think David put it well just a minute ago, talking about kind of invisible people. Living with disability is something that is personal to me. It's something I understand. It's something that I have, experiences with that I feel like are kind of invisible, these so to have that come up and to have so many actually fairly thoughtful answers was cool for that question. I also want to say that the issue of transgender health becoming an actual, not just it's transgender issues have been used as this very tiny soundbite a few times in these debates, and it was nice to have it be here's a real question about it, and we're going to let y'all debate and talk about it a little bit, not just move on immediately. I thought that was really important, and I thought that was another one where, again, we got to hear some good and interesting answers from different people about it. Besides that, I just want to say again that the Guantanamo Bay question was just that was the huge surprise. A lot of the questions, unfortunately, were kind of the same ground we've seen every debate. Climate change is important, but we've talked about it every debate. Healthcare is important, but we've talked about it every debate. We haven't talked about Guantanamo Bay or, some of the things that we're doing. It was very interesting to have these candidates up on stage talking openly about the fact that we are, like you were saying, Joe Biden kind of got into this, and then some of the other candidates did as well, that we are creating terrorism through bad foreign policy, and that this is a self-feeding cycle. And just to have that discussed on stage was very important, very, very important.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with you on that last point of it being rare that people will actually kind of say we're doing it to ourselves. I think there's a lot of that American exceptionalism when it comes to how we do our military conduct as well as how we have our own civil rights and basic kind of national security practices that really are causing us more harm than good. I would say, in my personal opinion, I don't think the answers to the transgender question were particularly great, in my opinion. I think Bernie should have went more into his Medicare for All, actually covering the procedures to actually allow people to transition, and or we could have conversations about the need for housing because there's a lot of poverty in those communities. I think that the idea of just reading off names is not really going to do much. It's kind of a very symbolic thing rather than a real solution. So I agree with you completely that it was a very important question to have. I was a little just disappointed with the answers that they had given on that one. David, do you have a thing you want to add, Kennedy?
Where I'll just give one small justification to Bernie's answer. I think this is a sensitive topic that a lot of these candidates don't know how to talk about well. And I thought that there were ways that Bernie phrased it that I agree that he should have said a little more, but I still thought that there were ways that he phrased it that were very sensitive, and it was his language that impressed me. Like specifically using words like what people need in talking about transgender health is not the way most people talk about it in American politics or mainstream media, and it should be. So I thought that there were some sensitivities to his words. Now, Warren reading off the names, that's another story.
Yeah.
But
No, yeah, I could see that. I think he at least addressed a direct need of the community with his answer. It was at least substantial to it. How about you, David? Was there any questions that you were particularly happy were asked during the debate?
Well, obviously, people with disabilities, because that's something that I also have a personal thing with. I suffer from Asperger's syndrome. So people call it Asperger's, but I like to go with the British pronunciation, I believe, which is Asperger's, because it sounds a little bit less, crude. So, yeah. So I'm glad they had that question, and that I think that was where it finally hit me. Like I said, that Yang is kind of that voice of the voiceless that I talked about. And I do want to talk a little bit more on my closing statement, if that's okay with you regarding that. Moving on. The other one that I'm glad they talked about was the Supreme Court justices, how they're going to shape the federal branch and how they're going to shape the Supreme Court. Because I think that a lot of the Democrats and a lot of the people that are voting do not understand this, how important that this election is. And because, okay, let me explain to you guys this. I'm technically an independent. Jonathan thinks I'm a progressive at heart. I probably am. I'm not going to lie. But I am an independent. I will say that it's rare for me to be like, I have to vote red or blue. And in this case, I am, with a couple exceptions, vote blue this year. And no one's ever seen me like this before. And they're saying, why that way? Is it because Trump's that bad? And it's like, it's not necessarily because of Trump, because I'm a big believer in equality and the balance of power. And if Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies while Trump is in office, you can kiss that balance of power goodbye. And that is so important that Trump be defeated in 2020, not because Trump bad or anything like that, or because, of income equality or whatnot. It's because if Ruth Bader Ginsburg gets replaced with a Supreme Court justice, most likely some far-right asshole, I guarantee you, it does not matter if Yang or Bernie or Biden or AOC or I don't care who is a progressive that's going to get up there, the Supreme Court will shoot it down for the next generation. That's why I'm saying it's so important that this kind of hits a light bulb in the heads of the Democrat Party here. You got to choose the right guy. You got to choose the right person to beat Trump, because if you don't, nothing's going to matter for probably the next, I'd say, at least 15 to 20 years.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that they explained to that topic.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you that there is a lot of implications that are coming with this election that go beyond Trump is a bad guy. There is a fundamental reshaping of our fundamental government. It's at our
Yeah.
judicial level, not just at the Supreme Court, but just
Yeah.
our federal judges as well.
And I know someone's going to counter me with, well, we can just add more Supreme Court judges. Oh, yeah, well, what kind of a solution is that? They can add more Supreme Court judges. That's going to lead, so they'll add like 4 more. Okay, so we got, what, 13. That will lead the Republicans to say, okay, we're going to add 8 more judges, 21. And then the Democrats would come back and say, well, we're going to add 12 more judges. That's 33. Before you know it, the Supreme Court's bigger than Congress. So obviously that's not a solution. That's not a permanent solution that you should go with. You know, you have to stop. The buck stops here. And if you want to beat Trump, you got to pick the right candidate. And I guarantee you, you're not going to do that with some of these mainstream establishment little hustles right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there's a lack of priority to say, you know what, we talk about the issues, but we need to talk about the power a little bit more often. And I can certainly hear you there. I think, in my opinion, the best question that I heard was the Christmas question. No, I'm just kidding. It was definitely not the Christmas question. I have to agree with you all that I really appreciated the conversation about disabilities. I have Asperger's as well, so I really felt that it was being able to talk to me in addition to what David said. So how about the bad questions? As I alluded to, there were some particularly peculiar questions that were asked during the evening. What did you guys think were some of the worst questions that were asked? How did you feel, John?
One of the bad questions was impeachment. I know they didn't stay, luckily they didn't stand it too long, but I'm kind of mad that they wasted 10 minutes on impeachment. Like, everyone on stage is on the same page. Yes, they all support impeachment. There's no surprises there. I don't know why we're wasting time for the third debate in a row, talking about it. I am glad that Yang brought up that it's not going to go anywhere in the Senate, because that's the reality. Trump isn't getting removed from office. So I'm glad he brought that up, but overall I'm not happy that impeachment was brought up as a topic because they all agree. And it's probably the only topic they all agree on. Another one was when they brought up the Obama quote that, you don't want to be too old. It seems like just like such an obvious shot at Bernie, and maybe to a lesser extent Biden, but Biden, he deflects it off of himself, and it's just, you can see clearly how Obama and basically the Democratic establishment can just shape the narrative of even the moderators' debate questions, because that would never have been a question if Obama didn't say it. And it was just annoying to see that they have to get in another question about Bernie's age, even though he has to respond to it every single debate. Obviously, the Christmas question, I thought that was kind of a waste of time. I didn't really see a reason for it. And even Yang was flustered by it when I asked him, because it's just that dumb of a question. And, there are other issues that they could have talked about. Are we doing another segment on what questions they didn't ask, or should I add that in here?
No, we'll get to that. How about you, Kennedy? Was there any questions that particularly frustrated you?
The question about the wealth tax was really, intellectually dishonest and just frustrating. Warren is not even my favorite candidate, It's not like I'm just out here to defend her, but, it was just a terrible question to ask her. And it just... I feel like in every debate, there's a few of these financially illiterate questions being asked by people that a lot of them make hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars as media personalities and definitely know how money works. So that was probably one of my most frustrating questions. Also, the free college question. And it's just every time that comes up, that's very frustrating. I feel like the moderators framed it about as poorly as they could have, even though that is a topic I would really love to have good discussions about at the debate. The moderators really seemed determined to just frame that badly, sort of hand it to the wrong people and then watch it turn into a fire show of just nonsense. Everything just... That was just everyone looked stupid answering that question. is basically how it turned out. So,
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with you. Some of the framing on questions might have been the most disappointing part about it in general. How about you, David? Was there any questions in particular that disappointed you the most?
Yeah, okay. So when the debate, like you guys said, when the debate started, Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad. Impeachment, really? For the second debate in a row, we're talking about impeachment, and we have seven candidates up on stage who, by the time they become president, assuming that they get inaugurated, Trump becomes a distant memory. I want to hear what their policies are. I want to hear what they're doing. I want to hear what they plan on doing. And I want to hear how they're going to help people like me. I don't want to hear how bad Trump is because I hear it every single day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year on cable news. Well, I don't watch cable news anymore, but you get my drift. So, really, I mean, outside of it would be a dead giveaway for me to say that the one question I hated the most was the get Christmas gift question. But you know what? At least that was a little bit charming in a way. It was a little corny, but it was kind of a charming kind of corny, where like it's like you're trying to get them to kind of make nice with each other. Okay, fine. It still sucked, but it's still kind of nice to see them kind of be friendly for a little bit. So okay, fine. I'll give you that one. It's still the second worst question of the night, but. But that impeachment question, just like that was just grating. I almost was just like I almost turned it off then. Really did.
Yeah, because honestly, I kind of agree with you that the question itself wasn't that terrible, like the Christmas question. I think a lot of it also was bad because of just how Judy Woodruff delivered it. It was just like so awkward in how it was actually handled. But I got to agree with you. I think the number one question that bothered me the most is that, of course, they had to start with impeachment. And
Right.
I think on top of what you all have said on this, these are senators on stage. These are the people who have to judge it. They're supposed to be impartial judges, and yet you're trying to make them become partisan actors on a stage. How could they
Right.
possibly assess a case fairly if they have to do this on stage? It makes no sense and should not be a question.
Right,
So,
and in my opinion, based on that evidence, I mean, that gives the Republicans enough evidence to ensure that Sanders, Klobuchar, and Warren should not appear now because of that. And that really is going to be problematic if they want if they want any chance at all at Trump, getting through the Senate. That's just my opinion on that matter. There was one thing I forgot to mention too, but I think I just lost my train of thought.
no
So
problem. Impeachment does that to the best of us. It really gets at our brains.
yeah.
But with that being said, I wanted to know, now that we've said what's good and what's bad, what was really missing from this debate? There's so many topics that they covered. I really don't think they went into enough depth on a lot of the topics. But in that breadth of topics, there was certainly stuff that was missing. What did you think, John? What did you wanted to add before that was missing?
Yeah, so like I said, Afghanistan they didn't cover enough, but just foreign policy overall has been like so lacking from a lot of the debates. They haven't asked anything about Bolivia, which is a huge issue. Like we literally just overthrew a democratically elected government. They never talked about the genocide in Yemen or our relationship to Saudi Arabia. So foreign policy overall, I just feel like is always missing. And even more so this time without Tulsi, it was especially lacking. They haven't asked any questions about whistleblowers or Julian Assange, which I know is not a huge issue for a lot of people, but like there are people's lives in danger because of the United States policies towards whistleblowers and publishers and enemies of the government, basically. And I think it would be a good thing if candidates actually were forced to be put on the spot for that subject. And yeah, I think overall those two issues could have been in the place of impeachment or the Christmas question, because those really had no place in the debate.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with you. I think they do lack in the foreign policy discussion. I think they really, every time, kind of go to a couple key points. They always go to China. They'll always go to, sometimes, it's like half the time they'll go to Israel. And then I think maybe they'll
Sometimes the Middle East.
yeah, exactly. There's so much more to the world. You could
But they
kind
just
of
like
even
touch on
talk,
it.
yeah, you could talk NATO, you could talk Latin America, you could talk actually going deep on the Uyghur question. Like that was finally a substantive question on China that wasn't just trade. So I agree, more breadth on foreign policy would be very appreciated. How about you, Kennedy? What did you think was really missing from yesterday's debate?
Well, as I kind of already indicated, like economic literacy frustrates me at these debates because again, I know that all these people on stage are economically literate, and when they pretend they're not, that is like irritating. And I think part of the way that you get around that is asking better economic questions. I think that a lot of working class, like basic issues never really get addressed. There could have been questions about wages versus productivity. There could have been questions about guaranteed housing or like, things like that. These are real working class issues that most Americans care about, regardless of party, because they're living it. So if you want to appeal to most Americans, asking them these sort of high concept governmental questions like they often drift into at times doesn't really make any sense to anybody, but talking about these like real personal economic issues would make sense to people. And I think it's something that has basically been missing from every debate. Like really, like has there been a question about unions in any debate? I know Bernie's brought it up a couple of times, but has there been an actual question about unions? You know what I mean? Like
Especially
things
with
like that.
this debate that almost got canceled because of that. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. That seems like it would be so
Right.
relevant.
Yeah, like
Right.
literally this debate could have been disrupted by a strike and we didn't talk about striking workers at all or anything related to that. So I felt like that was very missing. Again, these are issues that affect all Americans regardless of party and that speak to a lot of Americans even far on the other side of the aisle when you start talking about these things that actually affect their lives. So there should have been a way more time put into that and a lot less time talking about some Barack Obama quote.
Oh, I so strongly agree on that. And I will say, I am frankly shocked that Pete Buttigieg was the first person to bring up poverty during that night. I am blatantly shocked that it took him to be the one to mention poverty.
His consultants told him it was a good idea.
Well, if you saw his note sheet, he didn't have that there. He said smile. That's it. That's really what he wanted to make sure he did that night.
I didn't see that, actually.
But David, how about you? What did you think was really missing from the conversation yesterday?
I think you two pretty much just hit the nail on the head right there. I think of the two, though, more foreign policy or more on the economy, I think that more should probably have been focused on the economy because this is a very domestic policy heavy primary. Because one of the big topics is income inequality and healthcare. And definitely, like, we're kind of like a lot of people who are Democrats, the poor, the working class, are fighting for their lives right now in many of these cases. And there are many of us with disabilities as well, and growing by the day, also fighting for it. There are people with diabetes whose insulin prices went up a good, 10, 15 times the amount. Yeah, so I really think that being a domestic policy heavy, you think that they would talk more about the economy. And I would like to have heard as well how they planned to pay for all of their plan. Now, I know some talked about the wealth tax or whatnot, but I would like to hear a little bit more hard numbers. I mean, I'm a numbers guy. Come on. So, yeah, I would like to see some more hard numbers as well on some of their plans instead of just promising and wishing, because honestly, I heard a lot of promising and wishing in the, 4 presidential elections that I have been a part of now, from Bush, Obama, and Trump. And now here we are again on my 5th presidential campaign, more promises that I don't know if they can really keep. And I keep hearing this talk about modern monetary theory, and I want to hear more about that. What is this theory about? I want to hear more about how their policies, if that's how they're going to pay for it, is through this concept of MMT, or in the case of Yang, his UBI regarding the VAT tax. I want to hear more about that. So I mean, like stability what goes on in the homes and our own economy, actually the individual economy in the home, is what I felt like needed to be more pushed, especially in this domestic heavy meta that we have right now of the primary.
Yeah, no, I strongly agree with you on this because I think centrally this is the universal topic. And economics touches us all. We all need to have money in our pockets to be able to survive. We need to have the services provided to us so we have a roof over our head. And I think a lot of the times during this debate, they were focused a lot more on identity factors. Not that they shouldn't have time, but that they had too much time. I think that you need to focus on these things that really speaks to everyone. If this is supposed to be kind of an invitation to independents and potentially disaffecting Republicans as well, you want to have this be an inclusive message so that they can feel invited. With that being said, I kind of wanted to have now that holistic perspective. We kind of said what we liked, what we didn't like, what was missing. How did you feel that the moderators did overall? And did you feel like in any ways they had biases towards or against any of the specific candidates? John, what did you feel on that?
So, again, this is a low bar, but I think the moderators in this debate did better than any of the moderators in the previous debates. They weren't great by any stretch of the imagination, but they were certainly more fair, I think, and they asked some questions that hadn't been brought up in previous debates. So I think the moderators actually weren't terrible. Of course, they could have been better. Again, there was some bias against Bernie when we had like that climate change race question. That was, clear bias against Bernie. Tim Alberta, who was the guy, he was from Politico. There was like a controversy over whether he should be on the panel because he used to cover Republicans. Like, it's a horrible thing. And he was the best moderator of the night of any debate by far. So I think the moderators actually did not too bad of a job. Again, plenty of room for improvement. And I think the questions mostly were substantive, besides the impeachment and the Christmas one. And I'm still waiting on moderators to bring up all those issues that we mentioned before because they've been missing from every debate. So overall, I mean, there were questions, there were topics that they could have added, I think. But I think that they didn't do as bad of a job as previous moderators.
I hear you. We kind of are treating the moderators like we treat Joe Biden. There's a scale to them and how we grade them.
Yeah.
So, Kennedy, do you kind of agree with that assessment that it's good because they weren't as bad? Or where do you feel on the moderating job? And did they have any biases you thought were displayed?
I think that the moderators actually did kind of a bad job. I will say that the debates overall, again, like the bar is so low that maybe this could be argued to be the best one. But I think that actually maybe had a little bit more to do with the structure. I thought the structure of, especially like 2 debates ago, was like deplorable, very, very badly structured. And I think that they managed to make it a little bit more cohesive and coherent to where it actually felt like we were having conversations about topics, amongst these candidates, as opposed to just like kind of every candidate goes down a line and says something or things like that, which obviously like really didn't work out. And so I think it was well structured, but I think that the moderators kind of did a lot of weak questioning, not a lot of follow-ups on important questions, and also just in terms of did they show some biases? Absolutely, not just Bernie. And I would say, in fact, it's not even like all the moderators were against Bernie. One moderator was obviously biased against Bernie. I actually think you could probably make the argument that at least one of them seemed to give Bernie extra shots. So, maybe it balances somewhat. But the point is that I think that the moderators in general, they weren't nearly as impartial as they should have been, just kind of across the board. They really handed some easy questions to Steyer and Klobuchar, which, again, we've seen this pattern every debate of these like kind of crummy centrists that nobody actually likes that much getting these really nice questions and really sweet handling from the moderators. And there was one point in particular where Klobuchar was allowed to just run over the moderator trying to get her to end like 4 times. And that's not good moderation at that point. Like you're just too afraid to tell this person to shut up in the moment for whatever reason, but you're not being a good moderator. So I don't know. I felt kind of just lukewarm about it for sure.
Okay. How about you, David? How did you feel about the moderating job?
Okay, so if I had to grade them, considering that every other moderator set up to this point had gotten an F, with the exception of maybe the CNN ones got a D minus, I would say I give these guys a C minus. So congratulations, you're slightly below average. Regarding like the biases, okay, so the Bernie situation. I do agree that I felt like that at least one of the moderators was biased against Bernie. I don't think Bernie should have scuttled around that question regarding minority voters, but at first, at least he did. But the way that the moderator responded to him, could you please answer the question and get back on topic? That was and then she wouldn't do it for any other candidate after that. That was what hit me the most. Is like. I saw not even like 10 minutes later, Biden was scuttling around the question regarding the Guantanamo Bay, for example. So, I mean, you tell me, right? There's some kind of bias in there, I think. Outside of that, I don't think the moderators had that much bias. But I will say I think the mainstream media was horridly biased against Tom Steyer. And I'm giving him a lot of love tonight, which is really weird. But I have to say, Steyer definitely did a lot better than like a lot of the media is claiming. Like when I ran the numbers on who were the winners and losers of the debate, Steyer was the only one that got more losses than wins out of all the candidates, which surprised me for one, because I thought Pete would be the big loser. And two, because I don't know, maybe they don't like him because he's an outsider. But they wouldn't even mention like any of these really good points that he would talk about, like, gathering allies to push back against China and Hong Kong. I had already mentioned the question regarding non-white immigration, for example. Him constantly talking about how the government is broken and how he's an outsider and he can stop that and he can be the guy to take on Trump because he's the only guy that's run $1 billion business like Trump has. I mean, putting out all these questions. And the mainstream media just kind of just pushes it to the side and be like, oh, who's this freaking loser that's on stage buying his way into the debate? I mean, don't get me wrong. He did buy his way into the debate, but I think he did a lot better than what the media gave him credit for. And as far as bias for, I feel like the media is biased for Pete because I don't know how okay, New York Times, I gotta talk about this. New York Times, how the hell do you rate Pete Buttigieg higher than Andrew Yang? Explain this to me. How the hell is Pete Buttigieg a 6 point? I think you had like over almost half a point higher than Andrew Yang. Right? Who is this? Who are these bunch of morons that you brought out here that think to themselves, wow, Pete's getting knocked on all sides. Wow, he's fighting back. Oh, White Cave. 6.9 out of 10. And then, like, Yang sitting here acting like the most unique guy on the field, talking about all of these issues that a lot of people that independents like me have been wanting to hear for years. And he's, 6.4? I don't know. I think it was like 6.4 or something like that. I'm not sure. He was second lowest on theirs. And I think Pete Buttigieg was in the middle. And I'm just like, I have a beef with the New York Times right now. I've had a beef since the first debate where they rated Andrew Yang the lowest when he clearly was not the lowest. Don't get me wrong. He didn't do very well in the first debate. But to say that he did the lowest and then by like a wide margin, it just showed absolute disgusting bias to me. And then the New York Times doing this whole thing where Pete's getting attacked on all sides. He's looking like a clear loser. I mean, Stevie Wonder was even seeing this, all right? You have to be a clear, I'm sorry. That's a joke. All right? I'm a nice kid, all right? Like anyone could see this, all right? And just know that Pete Buttigieg lost this debate tonight. And you're sitting here telling me that he's finished middle of the pack. New York Post, you're sitting here telling me that he's a clear winner. 538. You're telling me he's going to go up in the polls because of this? I,
I feel you there. I think if we're looking at this New York Times specifically, maybe they like wine caves. We don't know. Maybe that gave him a cool factor. He gets to ball out in a crystals and tree wine cave. Maybe that's their perspective. But I have to agree with all three of you in kind of where the bias was being shown. And I really think it was at Bernie, it was at Yang, and it was at Steyer. And I even think Steyer during the debate. Like, I remember this one moment where he was answering a question on disabilities, and they basically said, yeah, Yang, Steyer didn't answer this question at all. Do you want to go slam him now? And he's just like, oh, okay. I remember I watched Steyer. He gets angry. He whips out the pen, starts writing something down. I'm thinking, this billionaire is about to murk them. And so that was him, and he had the second lowest time, and Yang had the lowest time. But I knew this debate was not going to be, great, obviously. I had a little bit of higher expectations because it was supposed to involve PBS. Maybe the public funding could be better. I know there's still problems there, but a little bit better. But then out the gate, I remember I'm over here, the Andrew Yang moment where they call Tom Steyer Andrew Yang twice. And they get that wrong from the gate. Then later, a separate moderator calls him Senator Yang. And then again, on climate change, the rules of the debate were any direct question, you get 1:15. And for rebuttals, you get 45 seconds. So they finally get to him on his direct question to answer on climate change, on a subject they should ask him about because he's one of the few who supports nuclear, and they were talking about that, as well as getting to higher ground, which is his literal plan name. And the guy goes, okay, you got 45 seconds. Just completely throwing the rules out of the debate altogether. So I think that was evident. And as much as I knock Bernie for the way he introed that question on race, it was very clearly biased to cut him off and not anyone else. I think he still responded well afterwards, but it was very bad optics, just the way they kind of got him on that. And I think that really showed their bias. So I agree all around that it was definitely bad, it was definitely biased, but damn, it's sad that it was still the best debate.
Yeah, and I had to correct myself on that. Pete Buttigieg actually finished 5th with the New York Times with a 6.6 average, and Andrew Yang finished 6th with a 6.3 average. Still, my point stands.
Yeah,
anyone see Chris Cillizza's Winners and Losers? I'm sure you're all familiar with Chris Cillizza.
Although I gotta tell you, I actually kind of agree, except for Biden. It's a very hot take to agree with Cillizza.
He said his loser was Bernie.
Yeah, I mean, that's wrong. That part's wrong.
He had Bernie as his only loser. There was unanimous agreement that Bernie was
I put Buttigieg as a winner, too. It was his, 4th winner, but a winner.
Yeah, I will say that I don't think Bernie had the best night. I actually have him as a neutral, but to call him a loser of the debate...
And not anyone else, it's insane.
Very silly.
Insane.
Yeah, right.
Oh, for sure. I think there is so much silliness with the media. I don't know if we're ever going to have any solution to this other than detaching debates from this. I hope we can truly do that, but that's not going to be happening anytime soon, and we're going to be having another debate come January. They recently announced the new criteria on who can actually get in, and the requirement is that you're going to need either 4 polls with 5%, or you're going to need 2 early state polls with 7%, and that you need 225,000 individual donors. There are some candidates that are currently on the cusp of being able to make it, and we have 4 currently who have already locked themselves a spot. Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Pete Buttigieg. So the 7 candidates that I see currently that have some bubble chances of being able to make it in, and I will admit some of these are stretch bubble candidates, you have Amy Klobuchar, Tom Steyer, Andrew Yang, Tulsi Gabbard, Cory Booker, Julian Castro, and I'm just going to shout out Marianne Williamson, because you know what? Who cares? We want her there because she's at least one of the most entertaining debaters. So with that being said, who out of those 7 do you think is going to actually make the January debate? I'll start with you, David. You had your hand raised.
Actually, I didn't have my hand raised because I was going to mention I held my hand like this, the number 5, because Amy Klobuchar did make the debate, so she is a lock.
She
Yeah.
made it. Okay. When did that happen
It's a
today?
lot. Yeah, for
I
the
think she was already
debate that
qualified.
happened, I think they did calculate it, and she did get 4 polls. I'm still not quite sure what the 4 were because I haven't had time to check it yet. I've been so busy with a lot of other stuff as well. Like I said, it's been a mess out here. But I'm the poll guy. I will take a look pretty soon, so you'll see that sometime soon. But of the remaining ones, so okay, do you want my personal opinion, like what I feel
Yeah.
like,
Who do you think's gonna make it?
or do you want me to go by the numbers?
I
I mean,
mean,
they're
you're a
two
numbers guy, so I'd assume your opinion's based on the numbers.
Okay, so in my heart of hearts, I would really like Andrew Yang to make the January debate. I also would definitely not mind Tulsi Gabbard making the January debate as well. However, I'm going by the numbers here, and I'm looking at the averages, and I'm finding it extremely hard pressed for anyone else to make the debate right now. Andrew Yang is the closest. I know he's at one poll right now, and Tom Steyer's at 2. Now the issue is that even though Tom Steyer's at 2, his entire life here is based on Nevada and South Carolina polls that don't come out very often. So if you think about it, a lot of it's going to depend on can he get those Nevada, South Carolina polls, and his margin of error is like 0. If he misses a Nevada, South Carolina poll, he's done. And even if he doesn't, might not be enough for him. So that's just something to think about and take into consideration regarding Steyer. Now, with Yang, it's a little bit easier because he can get 5% anywhere. He can get 5% easily in New Hampshire. He can get 5% in Nevada. My bad, Nevada. He can get 5% even in South. He got 4 in South Carolina earlier, so 5% is not completely out of the question. And especially with the Yang week pack coming up. They could get 5% in Iowa as well. That's definitely a possibility. So he can get 5% all over the place. So he can still get those 3 polls. But in my opinion, how does it look right now for him, considering the holidays is coming up and everything else? I hate to say it. As of right now, the numbers say he's not going to make the January debate. That's just the way it is. He will end up with 2 polls out of 4. And Steyer will end up with 3 out of 4. And they will both just miss the debate. None of the others even have a prayer at this point. Although, Marianne Williamson, I would. Okay, I really want to like Marianne Williamson. I really do.
Ooh, let's talk about it.
I really want to like her. Like, when I first, it's like there's the logical side of me and then there's the emotional side of me. All right? And the logical side of me is like, what the hell is wrong with this woman? Anti-vaccines, meet you on the battlefield of love, a Department of Peace. What the hell is this? But then there's okay, I have an artistic and creative side, and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I really like how she talks. I really like her charisma. I like her charm. And I really, really want to like her. But there's just a piece of me. I'm just like, can't do it. I just can't do it. I got a soft spot for her, though. I will say I got a soft spot for her. So, I mean, it would be interesting to see her in a debate again. Maybe in the 8th debate, where if they finally bring in the or clause, maybe she might get enough donors that she can get herself into the debate at that point. Maybe at that point, Castro and Booker might end up dropping out. I'm just making a guess on that one. And then you'd be left with 6, 7, 8, 9 right there on stage. So that's obviously a possibility. But yeah, my heart of hearts, I want Yang to make it, especially maybe Tulsi. But that's just the positive side of me kind of flowing. The logical side of me is saying we're pretty much locked in at this point. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the snowstorms in Iowa won't be the widest thing to hit Iowa this January. So,
yeah. So I see the 5-person debate with the person on the cusp being really Steyer, Gabbard, as well as Yang. I'd be kind of curious. Do you both agree with that? Kennedy, do you agree that we're going to have a 5-person debate, or do you think the field's going to be a bit larger?
Well, I think that there's a couple factors. First of all, I think Steyer will make it personally, because he's extremely invested in making it. And I mean that both like emotionally and literally lots of money, lots and lots of money. He's thrown this much money at it already. Who knows how much money he'll throw in January to get one more poll. I think he has a good chance. Beyond that, I kind of agree that I think it's somewhat locked in. I don't necessarily see anyone else making it. I would like Yang to make it. I would personally like it if Castro made it. And I would also obviously personally like it if Marianne Williamson somehow made it back into the debates. That would be incredible. The Gillibrand shirt, by the way, is just a joke, but Marianne, that's all real, and I'd be willing to talk about it more another time, perhaps. But it's one of those funny things where I do think. Here's what I think is that this is the wild card. I think a lot of the candidates are upset, even the ones that are getting on stage. They're upset. They're not happy with what the DNC is doing. And so I think the wild card is going to be how much pressure gets put on the DNC during January. Because although they've been unwilling to budge so far, I do think that there is a chance that they might say, okay, we'll soften the requirements just slightly. I don't think they'll soften them much, but they might soften the requirements just slightly that would let a few of these other candidates slide in. But it's just going to have to remain to be seen at this point if enough pressure will be put on the DNC and if they'll actually cave. But I don't think that's impossible. So that's my little out there prediction of, this is like the 15% chance, but it would be amazing if the DNC would just soften a little bit.
So to just clarify, you see 6 people making it in January. Steyer, in addition to the 5.
That's what I see right now. I don't think Steyer will give in easily. I think he'll just throw money at more polls and get in.
Okay, so we have one answer of 5 and one answer of 6. John, how are you feeling? Who do you think is going to be able to join the group?
Yeah, I mostly agree with what David said. I do not think there will be 7 candidates again. I think it'll be either 5 or 6. So, again, it depends on the amount of polls that come out, because I like to look at polls a lot on my show, too. So it depends on the amount of early state polls that come out. I don't think Yang or Steyer are going to hit 5% nationally in the qualifying poll. I just don't think it's going to happen. But if there are polls that come out in New Hampshire and Iowa, Yang has a shot. If there are polls that come out in South Carolina and Nevada, then Steyer has a shot. If early state polls just don't come out, not enough of them come out, then unfortunately neither of them are going to make it. I don't think anyone who wasn't on this past stage will make it again. Again, Cory Booker hasn't made it in a while. He won't make it. Castro, Marianne, they're not going to make it. Tulsi, she needs. She's going to have to go 4 for 4 with New Hampshire polls if she has any chance of making this debate. So, but that's the only issue is I don't think 4 qualifying New Hampshire polls will come out in time for the debate. You might get 2 or 3. I don't know if there'll be 4 that come out. And if they do, she has to go 4 for 4. So, I mean, Tulsi is a long shot to make the next debate. Again, it depends on the amount of polls that come out. But overall, the 5 that are on the stage, I think those are going to be, the 5 heading into Iowa, and maybe you might get Yang or Steyer on the stage. But just looking at the polls, Yang does not have enough support, I don't think, in the other early states to get a 5% from them in the qualifying polls. I think there's another shot to Iowa and New Hampshire. So, like I said, it's either going to be 5, maybe 6 at best.
Okay. Yeah, and I also have to say, even if Tulsi makes it, is she going? We don't know. So, yeah. So
I have to say, I really do hope Tulsi makes another debate, because every time she makes a debate, I have a nickname for Tulsi Gabbard. It's the Tulsinator, goddess of destruction and wrecker of campaigns. And it has shown, I've explained how every time she enters a debate, someone loses their campaign. Where's Tim Ryan? Exactly.
I will say, though,
the next one.
Although, I gotta say, I think the Tulsinator is starting to become a little less effective. Who did she destroy last time she was in? She tried to destroy Pete, but Pete rose after that. So I think the Tulsinator might just be in her last breaths. And with her stance on impeachment, I think if you get attacked by Tulsi now, some may just view that as a beneficial thing. I think
true.
it's a very interesting case. And I actually think, kind of on the same regards to you all, it's going to be either Yang or Steyer getting in. I really don't think it's going to be both. It's going to be ending up 6, in my opinion. I think Yang is going to raise in those national polls. I think we saw that in some of the numbers coming out of this debate. I also think it's one of the few times I've seen him say a very clear falsehood on the debate stage. Cory Booker is not going to be back. That is very clear. So that's a little bit of a disappointing factor. I hope we can see that, because I agree it's an interesting look for the party who wants to be the identity politics party to not really have much representation there, especially after Yang's most memorable moment was, why are people of color not making the stage? And I think that's going to stick in people's mind potentially whether or not he makes it.
I can actually answer that question pretty easily. And I've told you this answer, Jonathan. You want me to say it? Okay. I'm just going to call it as it is. The first 2 primary states are Iowa and New Hampshire. Very heavily white. And a lot of people are taking that into consideration. No one's really taking into consideration the Hispanic-heavy Nevada or the black-heavy South Carolina because they're 3rd and 4th. Everyone knows with history, history just says, like, you have to win one of Iowa or New Hampshire in order to win the primary. That's just been kind of a pattern that's been going on. I think it's only happened once that has not happened, that someone had lost Iowa and New Hampshire and still went on to win the nomination as far as the primaries are concerned. Now, that being said, that's why, being so white heavy, you see so many candidates that are doing well that are, well, white, is because we are in white heavy states and it is a very white heavy territory. Unfortunately, that's what it is. And they're trying to pretend to be candidates of color out there. And, well, this is what you get.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and this is one of the few reasons why, Julian Castro deserved a little bit more love than he got as well. He was one of the few people to start calling that out. And I think that is a shame that never really became a topic on stage beyond Yang getting to talk about it. It would have been great to see everyone else have to handle that question of how would you empower these voices to have a real representation in the party, even if it's not necessarily the president. With that being said, I want to thank you all for coming on today, for giving your opinions on this debate. I'm glad that we had a lot more agreement despite our different supporter bases. I think we can really see that both of our candidate bases really shine through in this debate. And we, unfortunately, are going to have to deal with a lot of hype for Klobuchar. God rest us all.
Hey, hang on for a moment, all right? I did find out in an article that Klobuchar says that frozen pizza is a vegetable, so she's gone up in my book now. Frozen pizza is a vegetable. Awesome job, Klobuchar. Keep it up. Awesome job.
Well, with that being said, I think that is the most substantive policy she has on her books now, and so we can praise her. Pizza, it's a vegetable now. Klobuchar 2020.
And one more thing I do want to tell everyone who watches this, and I think everyone here will agree with me on this one. Remember what I said back in the, I think, 4th question, that Andrew Yang was kind of the voice of the voiceless. Well, I had this discussion with someone who told me that Pete Buttigieg was like a white Yang. And I'm here to tell you, I don't think that Pete Buttigieg is anything like Yang. Matter of fact, I think he's the opposite of Yang. He is not the voice of the voiceless. He is the voice of those that already have too much of a voice. And I want anyone who is a Democrat that is going to vote in the primary to take this into consideration. Please, please choose your candidate wisely. Remember 2016. Remember what the establishment pushing Hillary Clinton, who back then was the voice of those that had too much of a voice, did over Bernie, who was back then the voice of the voiceless, and in some ways still is, by the way. So remember that. If you're thinking about voting for Pete, if you're thinking about voting for Bloomberg, I want you to just think about that carefully. And remember, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court, a generation is on the line here. Please consider. Okay, I'm done.
I think that's a great point, and I also think this is a bigger problem of just the whole Democratic Party as a whole. I think you had many voices lining up to defend exactly that statement, giving the powerful more of a voice. Gavin Newsom just did that, defending the wine cave because he has his own wine cave, and he said hundreds of Democrats have raised money in the wine cave. Well, too bad. That's the exact problem.
And if you don't believe me that other independents will not listen, will listen to a Yang or a Bernie than they will to someone like Pete Buttigieg or even to Biden or Klobuchar, go to my Twitter. Go to Pirates and Polls at David Walker CLT. You will see all the charts that prove otherwise, that independents will listen to people like Yang, will listen to people like Bernie. Yes, Bernie, far left Bernie. I'm talking about that Bernie. Yeah, independents will listen to them over some of these establishment candidates. So when you decide to vote, please choose wisely on who you want to vote. And also, I just plugged my poll Twitter, so I'll let you two plug in your stuff as well. So.
I was going to say, that's a great transition to give our other friends here a chance to say what they got going on. How about you, Kennedy? What do you have out there that the Rosebuds should be checking out?
Well, like I mentioned at the beginning, Not Safe for Wonks is my podcast. I host that with two other wonderful people. We really explore emotion and existential thought in politics. I have utter respect for numbers in the polls, and I do all that stuff too. But sometimes it's good to look at why people are doing what they're doing on like a more sort of core level. And that's the kind of stuff that we like to do on our podcast. We're doing a lot of interviews with brand new Congress candidates, people like that right now. So check it out. It's a lot of fun. And, we're doing everything that we personally can to like see change in 2020 beyond even just the president. Like this is way bigger than that. And that's what we're all about is big structural change in 2020. Not Safe for Wonks. You can find us everywhere that podcasts are, and NSF Wonks on Twitter.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. There's a reason why I don't do a reaction video to every single debate, and it's because there is so much more than this theatrics in the world. And there's so much more than the president, too. There's so much more importance in Congress and getting the people who are actually going to put legislation forward and who are going to actually approve it in the Senate before it ever gets to the president's desk to sign. So I agree, it's a really important cause, and everyone should go check that out. So, John, what do you have going on that you want the Rosebuds out there to know about?
Okay. Real quick, I know we're short on time, but I just wanted to add, speaking of the voice for the voiceless, I know David just mentioned a few minutes ago, the audience in the debate was just so stacked against the progressives and outsider candidates. It was so blatantly obvious. You would see some of the best lines of the night from like Bernie or Yang, and you would get like very mellow applause, and then they would go crazy with applause if someone just mentioned like a basic like establishment policy. It's because there were just a bunch of rich assholes in the audience. You had like the Neera Tandons in the audience who they're there because they don't like Trump and because they have a lot of money, and they hate anyone who threatens their power. So I would suggest that if you want to see a real representation of what the people think of the debate performance, I would say put the workers of the arena in the audience and see who they applaud to more, as opposed to some DC assholes.
It would have been interesting if they had Sodexo there. That would have been a very interesting...
Yeah, put Sodexo in the audience, put the janitors in the audience, like put literally anyone but the people in the audience who were in there in the audience. But that being said, I have a show on YouTube, The Outsider Report. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Twitter at Outside Report. I do videos either every day or every other day. Just whenever a story comes up or something about the race comes up. So I follow a lot of polls, and I go on a lot of rants. I was pretty calm here, but if you want to see me rant, go check out my show. But that's about it for me.
Well, that's great to hear. I appreciate the good rant myself. That was how we really wanted to start the channel, but then, having great conversations like this is also really great as well. So yes, everyone go check out The Outsider Report and see more of John's work. With that being said, on here of the Hill of Roses, we have a couple polls that we're going to be dropping down in the section below, so go check that out. I'm going to leave it as a surprise so you actually go check it out rather than just ignore it from me saying it right now. Look down below. Just go give it a check. With that being said, Rosebuds, until next time, I want you all to stay rosy and have a great rest of your week.
Right.